The level of mainstream acceptance of psilocybin, as a therapy, as a legitimate thing to do, as an experience that you talk about publicly, has changed completely in the last couple of years. And I think that owes in part to your film, and in part to my book, and in part to the research that's come out, which has been
Right.
so positive and encouraging. But we have gone through a complete change of public attitudes. It's not everywhere yet. I mean, we're talking to people who are positively inclined, I think both of us. And I still run into people who are very resistant, but I'm astonished at the change. I'll give you one example. Look at all these psychedelic centers popping up on campuses all over America. Prestigious universities, Harvard, Yale, Berkeley. Uh, I remember when I was researching the book, I interviewed a prominent scientist on my campus who was fascinated by psychedelics and very interested in the potential of psychedelics. And I said, "So why aren't you studying this? Why don't you do this in your lab?" And he said, "It would be the kiss of death for my graduate students." Well, now he's part of the Berkeley Center for the Science of Psychedelics and will be engaging in research. It's lost its stigma in the academy, which is a big deal. And I think it will in the culture too. I'm amazed at the people who've reached out to me who are seeking psychedelic therapy or who've shared their psychedelic experiences with me. It's people you would never expect.
Yeah.
So I think public attitudes have changed, and I think they'll continue to change. Absolutely. And why is this? I mean, when I published How to Change Your Mind, I really expected to get a lot of pushback, especially from like establishment psychiatrists and psychologists that would see this as very risky and threatening because they're very wedded to a certain kind of, drug, SSRIs, and certain kinds of therapies. And this was coming from the fringes of the culture, not up through big pharma. And to my surprise, they embraced it. They were very curious about it. And what as I talked to them, I gradually came to understand they're desperate for new tools. And they haven't had any new tools since the SSRIs were introduced in the early 80s. And those are not considered very good tools anymore. Um, and so the openness to this kind of innovation has been really striking to me. And the resistance seems to be melting away. And yes, there's probably the chance of another backlash. And I think that companies could make mistakes in introducing this. I think the culture could make mistakes in its use of this. But I think we've learned some lessons from the 60s too. And it's not as much of a generational split. Part of what made them so controversial in the 60s is they were being used pretty much exclusively by the young, and they accentuated what we then called the generation gap. And here you had the young in this culture having this profound rite of passage, the acid trip or the psilocybin trip, the end of which they ended up in a very different place, questioning the war, questioning authority, dropping out in various ways. And this was all very threatening to their parents and to the government. And specifically, as you alluded to President Nixon, who, at one point called Timothy Leary the most dangerous man in America. He also called Daniel Ellsberg that, but so he had two most dangerous men in America. But I think now so many people in this culture have had psychedelic experience, people of all ages. I mean, the boomers who were using psychedelics are now in charge. So I don't think you have this generational tension around psychedelics. They could still run afoul. In psychedelic therapy, there's the risk of sexual abuse, which exists in all forms of therapy, but I think it's accentuated in psychedelic therapy. I think that you've got the risk of suicides if they're used sloppily, as happened in the 60s. There were a handful of suicides, but they became big stories because it involved psychedelics. So I think that, we can't treat this cavalierly. I think we have to keep in mind that it's a really profound consequential experience, and we can't treat psilocybin the way we've treated cannabis because it's a different thing.
Totally. Well, it's sort of a miracle that it does, trigger a quote unquote spiritual or mystical, experience. And I remember when I was, doing the film and interviewing people like Bob Jesse, for example, who almost, I think, broke down and cried because for the first time back then, 4 or 5 years ago, he's telling me, about his experience, an experience that normally would either get you in jail or lose your job. And for him, it was perhaps the most profound experience in his life. And that's when it kind of clicked in my head. I said, well, this is really similar to like religious persecution, because if you have this really deep, mystical, spiritual experience and you can't talk about it, that's certainly similar to that. But I also believe that that's what's helping this explosion right now, because people are dying to come out of the closet, just like the suppression with gay rights, and it happened faster than anybody thought. When
Yeah,
Obama went into office, he was against gay marriage. When he
that's right.
left, Republicans were for it. I mean, when something is suppressed, the lid's going to pop. And I think the passion behind the movement, a lot of it has to do with the fact that it changed people's worldview and therefore their whole life.
For many people, it's had that effect, and hearing that, of course, changes everything. There are people who've had big experiences on psilocybin or LSD who didn't know what they meant. And depending on the community they were in, they might have been encouraged to interpret it as, oh, that was just the drug talking. You just had too much. You just had a weird trip. But if you hear people like Bob talking about this as a legitimate spiritual experience, it puts another lens on it. And I think that one of the fascinating things that's going on right now as people share these remarkable stories of self-transformation at the hands of either psilocybin or other psychedelics, is it encourages people to go back and look at their own experience and interpret them as this actually has meaning. That wasn't the drug talking. The drug has nothing to say. Whatever you experienced came from somewhere else, and it from inside you or the universe or who knows where. But to dismiss it as a drug effect, given how variable the effects of these drugs are, just makes no sense. So one of the things that's happening is people are being licensed to rethink what's happened and put it in a different context. And a spiritual context is just one context. Other people put it in a psychodynamic context, and it's revealing something about their subconscious. And it doesn't really matter, but the point is there's a lot of meaning here.